Welcome to the Hindu Daily. We are jumping straight into the deep end today, starting with, well, a massive shift in how we understand global power. Specifically, how artificial intelligence is completely rewriting the rule book on world order.
It's a fascinating, if maybe a little terrifying place to start. We're looking at an editorial that centers on a concept it calls rupture.
Rupture.
Yeah, and normally, in geopolitics, we talk about transitions. One power slowly fades, another one rises. It's gradual.
Is there a smoothish handover?
But this source argues we're way past that. We're in a rupture, a clean break.
And this idea comes from a speech by Mark Carney, right? The former governor of the Bank of England.
Exactly. He was at the World Economic Forum, and he was painting this pretty grim picture of how the world is fragmenting.
What was his main point?
He was saying that things we thought were good, like economic integration, supply chains, financial systems, they're now being used as weapons.
Weaponized.
Yes. His direct quote was, "We are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition." But the editorial here points out a huge, glaring omission in his speech.
Okay, what did he miss?
He talked about tariffs, trade wars, all the usual suspects. But he barely touched on the single biggest disruptor of all.
AI.
Artificial intelligence. Which, when you think about it, feels like a massive oversight.
I mean, we're seeing these large language models roll out at a speed that makes the Industrial Revolution look like it happened in slow motion.
Precisely. And the argument here is that while leaders are still focused on tariffs, AI is fundamentally overturning the entire international order that was set up after World War II.
So it's not just a new piece of tech.
It's not a tech upgrade. It's a collapse of the old way of doing things. You have Microsoft's CEO, Satya Nadella, explicitly stating that AI is already being used as a tool of statecraft.
Statecraft, that's a heavy word. It implies AI is now, what, a diplomat? Or maybe a spy?
Both and more. And it's creeping into sectors you really wouldn't expect or at least wouldn't want it to.
Like what?
The source highlights the judiciary, for instance. We're now seeing a very real risk of AI hallucinations.
Hallucinations. You mean the AI just makes things up?
It fabricates facts, yes. It creates fake citations, fake legal precedents. And this is leaking into actual court judgments.
Wow.
So if you can't trust the legal record anymore because an AI just invented a case, the foundational trust in our institutions just, it starts to crumble.
I think the most visceral example in this article, the one that really sticks with you, is the military one.
Oh, absolutely. It paints this incredibly vivid image of the war in Ukraine.
What's that image?
It says the defining image of this conflict isn't a tank. It's not a fighter jet.
No.
It's a Ukrainian soldier on a quad bike.
A quad bike.
Yeah, wearing night vision goggles, launching a cheap jerry-rigged drone to hold off a global superpower. That single image, that is the rupture.
It's completely asymmetrical.
Totally. It represents a massive transfer of power. Power is moving away from the traditional heavyweights who spend billions on aircraft carriers to anyone with some tech know-how and a drone.
And the article says it gets even darker.
It does. It discusses the shift from systems a human controls to systems that are fully autonomous. We're moving toward drone swarms that can make their own battlefield decisions.
So the doomsday scenario.
That's the one. The fear is that AI just runs away with the bit in its mouth. When these weapons become fully autonomous, we could reach a point where AI eclipses human control entirely.
A non-human entity making life or death decisions.
Yes. The editorial calls it a colossal transfer of power to something that isn't human. So what here is, it's about as urgent as it gets.
I need guardrails yesterday.
We need oversight. Scientists, political leaders, they need to establish checks and balances immediately because right now, the technology is moving so much faster than the diplomacy that's meant to contain it.
Leaving that. Very scary thought hanging there. Let's move to the skies. Specifically, India's ambition to build its own fifth-generation fighter jet.
Right. The Advanced Medium Combat Aircraft, or AMCA.
And there's a bit of a controversy brewing here about who actually gets to build it.
There is. The report suggests the contract for the prototypes isn't going to the state-run giant, HAL.
Hindustan Aeronautics Limited.
Correct. Instead, it seems to be going to private players. The article essentially describes them as startups in this context.
On the surface, bringing in the private sector. That sounds good, right? More innovation, more speed.
In theory, yes, absolutely. But the editorial's argument is that building a fifth-generation fighter jet isn't like building a car, and it's certainly not like building an app.
It's a different league entirely.
It requires a massive, established industrial ecosystem, And that's what HAL has.
Because AJL's been doing this for decades.
For about 80 years. The whole argument boils down to logistics and infrastructure. HAL in Bengaluru has everything under one roof, or at least very close by.
Design, hangars,
Test rigs, and, crucially, the flight testing facilities. Everything is already there.
and these private players don't have that.
They're starting from scratch. They lack the hangars. They lack the flight testing infrastructure. And here's a critical bottleneck the source points out. The pilots.
Right. You can't just hire a test pilot on LinkedIn.
Exactly. There's only one test pilot school in the country. HAL effectively has a monopoly on the pilots qualified to test these machines.
So if a private company tries to build this from the ground up somewhere in the hinterland,
They'd have to build the factory, the runway, all the testing rigs, and then somehow find the pilots. It could add years, maybe more, to the timeline.
which we just don't have. So what's the proposed solution? The article mentions something it calls bureaucratically outlandish.
I love that phrase. The suggestion is basically a hybrid model.
Okay, how would that work?
Give the contract to the private entity. You get the competition, you get the new ideas,
Yeah.
but you force them to co-opt HAL's existing facilities in Bengaluru.
So private management, but public infrastructure.
Precisely. Don't build a new airfield in the middle of nowhere. Use the mecca of aviation that already exists. It's a very practical fix to a huge strategic problem.
Very smart. Now, speaking of strategic problems, let's look north to Canada. They seem to be in a pretty tough spot with their neighbor to the south.
If we're not at the table, we're on the menu. That's the quote from Prime Minister Mark Carney that opens this piece.
It's a great line, but it really sounds like Canada's on the menu right now. This is an opinion piece on an energy standoff.
It is. President Trump is threatening 100% tariffs, even closing bridges like the one between Windsor and Detroit.
And this is all because Canada made a trade deal with China on electric vehicles.
That's the trigger. It's classic hardball politics. But the really interesting part of this analysis is how it compares leverage.
Okay.
So when the U.S. put pressure on China, China fought back. They used their control over rare earths.
Right, the minerals you need for all our tech, for chips and batteries.
And that really hurt the U.S. because they rely on China for something like 35% of those imports. China had a genuine chokehold.
So the big question is, does Canada have a similar chokehold?
Well, on paper, it looks like they do. They have oil, a huge amount of oil.
How much are we talking?
60% of all U.S. crude oil imports come from Canada. So in theory, that's a massive weapon. You could just threaten to turn off the tap.
But the article argues they can't actually do that. Why not?
It's what it calls an infrastructure trap. 95% of Canada's oil exports go to one customer.
The U.S.
They don't have the pipelines to send it anywhere else.
They're completely locked in. But it gets even worse than that. Geography plays a really cruel trick on Canada here.
How so?
The oil is produced in the west, in Alberta, but most of the Canadian population is in the east, Toronto, Montreal. And to get their own oil from their west to their east,
Let me guess. The pipeline goes through the U.S.
it loops down through the United States. So their own energy security is physically intertwined with the U.S. pipeline network. Wow. So they can't cut off the U.S. without basically cutting off their own eastern provinces.
Exactly. The article concludes that, maybe Canada could threaten specific northern states like Montana or Maine, but the volumes are just too small to hurt the U.S. on a national scale. Canada's leverage, it turns out, is mostly an illusion.
That is a tough realization for a middle power. Okay, let's shift gears completely. We're going from geopolitics to color.
Yes, the ecological discoloration of a warming world. This is a really fascinating piece from the science section.
And it claims that climate change is literally desaturating the planet. Is that right? The colors are fading.
In many ways, yes. We're seeing oceans become greener because of phytoplankton blooms, and forests are browning from drought. But the most striking examples are happening to the animals themselves.
The butterflies in the Amazon, that part was amazing.
Right. So as deforestation happens, the environment becomes duller, browner. And in response, the butterflies are losing their bright, vibrant colors. They're evolving to be duller because they need better camouflage against that degraded environment. If you're a bright blue butterfly against a dead brown forest, you're an easy lunch for a bird.
That is incredibly sad. And it's not just about camouflage, is it? It's also about heat.
Exactly. This brings us to a couple of scientific rules mentioned in the piece. Bogart's rule and Gloger's rule.
What do they say?
The basic idea is that in warmer climates, animals tend to produce less melanin. They become lighter in color to better reflect heat and avoid overheating.
So as the world gets warmer, nature literally gets paler.
That's the general trend, yes. But, and this is a really interesting twist, the opposite is happening in our cities.
The opposite.
A study in China found that urban birds are actually becoming darker and duller.
How is that possible?
Pollution. Heavy metals and soot from the air are binding with the melanin in their feathers, making them darker. It's almost an echo of the peppered moths during the Industrial Revolution in England.
So the planet is bleaching in the wild and getting grimy in the cities.
A pretty good summary. And the article also brings this underwater, mentioning India's underwater forests.
Coral reefs.
Yes, the coral reefs. In the Gulf of Mannar, in Lakshadweep, the corals are bleaching. They're turning bone white because of heat stress.
And when they turn white, they're dying.
They're expelling the symbiotic algae that keep them alive. It's a visual signal of a dying ecosystem. So the takeaway is really profound. Climate change isn't just about the temperature on a thermometer. It is actively changing the visual palette of life on Earth.
From the colors of nature to the turbulence of travel. We have a text and context piece now on India's aviation sector.
And turbulence is definitely the right word. The article argues the sector is facing a systemic fragility.
It certainly feels that way. You hear about flight delays and cancellations constantly. The article points the finger squarely at a duopoly.
It's a truly staggering statistic. Indigo and the Air India Group now control nearly 90% of the domestic market.
90%.
And it gets even more concentrated. Indigo by itself is the sole carrier on 60% of India's routes.
That sounds incredibly risky. So if Indigo has a bad day, the entire country just stops moving.
That is exactly what happened this past December. The whole network seized up. But the root cause isn't just market concentration. It's a severe underlying pilot shortage.
Let's break down those numbers.
Okay. So India needs an estimated 7,000 new pilots by 2026.
7,000? That's a lot.
It is. But the regulator, the DGCA, they only issued about 7,700 licenses in the last 4 years combined. The math just doesn't work.
And then on top of that, you have new safety rules coming in, the FDTO.
The flight duty time limitation, right?
Right.
These new rules require pilots to have more rest between flights.
Which is good for safety, obviously.
It's essential for safety.
Yeah.
But here's the problem. Indigo operates with a pilot-to-aircraft ratio of about 14. The global benchmark for a safe, resilient airline is 18 to 20.
So they're already stretched thin.
Very thin. And if you enforce these new, longer rest rules with the old, lower staff numbers, the schedule just collapses. There aren't enough pilots to fly the planes.
What about new airlines? The article mentions a few new names. Shank Air, Al Hind Air, Fly Express. Can they save the day?
The analysis here is pretty skeptical. It warns that without major structural support like more pilot training schools and better infrastructure, these new players might just end up redistributing fragility.
Redistributing fragility. I like that. So they'll just have the same problems.
They risk repeating the exact same failures we saw with Kingfisher, Jet Airways, and more recently, Go First.
And there's a safety warning at the end of the piece that's pretty chilling.
19 safety violation notices were issued in 2025 alone. The system is operating beyond its safe design limits. It's a big red flashing light for the whole sector.
Okay, let's leave Earth's atmosphere entirely. We're going to space. The private space race is pivoting.
It really is. For years, the big public narrative from SpaceX was Mars, Mars, Mars.
And Blue Origin was all about space tourism.
Right, but now all of a sudden, both of them are making a hard pivot to the moon.
Why the sudden change? Or maybe, was it really that sudden?
It feels sudden. You have SpaceX now targeting a lunar base by 2027. But the article suggests this is really about the public narrative finally catching up with the practical reality.
And the reality is all about the money.
Money and politics. NASA is under immense geopolitical pressure to beat China back to the moon. So that's where the big government contracts are right now, the Artemis program.
And the physics of it just makes more sense, too.
Oh, it's much, much easier.
Yeah.
You have 3 launch windows to get to the moon every single month.
And for Mars.
For Mars, you get 1 launch window every 26 months. So if you miss your Mars window, you're waiting 2 years. If you miss a moon window, you wait about a week.
So Mars was the great marketing hook, but the moon is the actual business plan.
That's a perfect way to put it. Elon Musk is now talking about a self-growing city on the moon. Blue Origin is actively shifting resources away from their tourism rocket to focus on their lunar lander.
So they've realized it's a necessary stepping stone.
They've realized that to get to Mars eventually, they have to pay the bills today. And the moon is the geopolitical and financial prize of the moment.
And finally, we land back on Earth in the grocery aisle. A business story about Tesco.
This is a classic tortoise and the hare story, but, for rapid delivery.
Right. A few years ago, we were all told that these startups like Getir and Gorillas were going to destroy traditional supermarkets with 10-minute delivery.
Death by 1,000 nibbles, they called it.
So what happened? Where are they now?
Well, they're mostly gone. They consolidated or they went bankrupt. They just burned through billions in venture capital trying to build all these new, expensive warehouses.
And meanwhile, Tesco
just waited. They watched. And then when the time was right, they launched their own service called Whoosh.
Whoosh. It's a great name.
It is. And their strategy was just brilliant in its simplicity. Instead of building hundreds of new, dark stores, they just used what they already had.
There's 1,600 existing supermarkets.
Exactly. They have their staff pick the groceries right off the same shelves that you or I would shop from.
So their delivery time is, 20 minutes? Which is close enough for most people. But their costs must be a fraction of the startups.
A tiny fraction. And it's working. Whoosh sales are up 47%. Tesco now holds nearly 29% of the entire UK grocery market.
So what's the big lesson here for investors or business students?
Deep pockets win. And sometimes the best strategy for an incumbent is just to have the patience and the capital to wait for the disruptors to run out of money.
They survived the disruption by just absorbing it.
They did. Interestingly, the article notes Tesco still trades at a discount compared to a U.S. giant like Walmart, but investors see them as effectively controlling the U.K. market now.
From AI ruptures to grocery wars, that has been quite the journey today. Thank you for listening. If you want to provide suggestions, please contact on the Twitter handle given in the episode description. As always, we are eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.